In the Republic of Korea, there lies a remote and isolated island. Here, all the dirty, backbreaking work falls on the women, while the men, after doing the bare minimum, are showered with endless praise from the older women on the island. For Bok-nam, taking even a moment to rest invites a storm of insults and abuse from the others. But the torment doesn't stop there when her husband leaves for fishing. His younger brother takes advantage of her helplessness and violates her. As if that weren't cruel enough, her husband went on to do something unimaginable. Yet, Bok-nam has endured this living hell for 30 long years. The story begins on a quiet morning. Bok-nam stands on the rocks, her face lit with hope as she gazes toward the boats on the horizon. Her childhood friend Haewon will be arriving soon. Haewon has been living and working in Seoul, but after a tense incident at work slapping a colleague in front of everyone, her boss forced her to take a mandatory vacation. And so, Haewon returns to the place where she once lived as a child. As the boat approached the shore, Bok-nam couldn't contain her excitement. She ran eagerly to greet Haewon, wrapping her in a big, heartfelt hug. Looking at the fair-skinned, stunning woman before her, Bok-nam's face lit up with disbelief. The women on the island were quick to welcome Haewon, showering her with praise. Life in Seoul must be wonderful. Haewon, you're so beautiful. Meanwhile, Bok-nam introduced her husband and his younger brother to Haewon. Haewon smiled politely and greeted them in return, but the pleasant moment was soon shattered by an unwelcome voice. An elderly woman suddenly barked at Bok-nam, scolding her for calling the men by their names, saying it was disrespectful. She then ordered all the women, including Bok-nam, to get back to work. Bok-nam quickly spoke up, saying she wanted to take Haewon to her grandfather's house first. As they arrived at the house, Bok-nam's daughter, Yeon-hee, came running up to them. Bok-nam gently urged her daughter to say hello to Haewon, but the little girl seemed afraid. Without a word, Yeon-hee turned and ran off. Embarrassed, Bok-nam hurried to explain. She's just not good with people. Haewon asked, "What grade is she in?" "She's already 10, she said, "but she hasn't gone to school. The people here think education is useless. They believe only men deserve to study." She wanted to ask Haewon if she could help take Yeon-hee away from the island. Sensing the weight of the conversation, Haewon quickly changed the subject. Brushing off the question, she smiled and said, "It's been 15 years, and your room is still so clean." Bok-nam smiled softly, telling Haewon that she spent 3 whole days cleaning the house after hearing she was coming back. Haewon, snapping back to the moment, asked again, "What was it you wanted to say earlier?" But this time, Bok-nam couldn't bring herself to speak. Instead, she quickly changed the subject, saying she would go prepare something for Haewon to eat. Later, when Haewon drifted off to sleep, Bok-nam gently tucked a pillow under her head. Showing a quiet kindness, the scene shifts. Bok-nam's family is gathered around the dinner table. Her husband, Man-jong, casually mentioned that he would go fishing that night, but when Bok-nam muttered, "You always come back empty-handed," Man-jong's face twisted with anger. After Man-jong left, his younger brother, Cheol-jong, quietly snuck into Bok-nam's house. He pushed open the door to Bok-nam's room and took advantage of her. When Man-jong returned from fishing later that night, Bok-nam, still reeling from what had just happened, hurried to greet him at the door, but his eyes quickly fell on the leaves scattered on the bed, and he knew exactly what had taken place. Yet, he said nothing. This wasn't new to him. Instead, he let his silent fury boil over and took it out on Bok-nam. The door slammed shut, and sounds of his fists echoed from the room. Outside, Bok-nam's daughter, Yeon-hee, sat calmly eating an apple, her expression blank. The next day, Bok-nam worked tirelessly, kneeling on the ground to mix cement. Her, Man-jong and Cheol-jong were on the roof, carefully laying tiles handed to them by the older women on the island. From below, the women showered the men with exaggerated praise. Even a whole group of women can't compare to a single man. Nearby, Bok-nam's hands trembled with exhaustion, and she paused for a brief moment to rest. That was all it took for one of the older women to start yelling at her again. A kinder woman nearby softly suggested, "Let Bok-nam take a break," but the old woman scoffed, completely ignoring her plea. By midday, Bok-nam arrived with a freshly prepared meal for Haewon. Smiling, she asked, "Do you want to go for a bath? We can go to the pond where we used to play as kids." After Haewon finished eating, Bok-nam kindly offered to wash her clothes. As she held up Haewon's beautiful dress and compared it against herself, a sigh escaped her lips. She carefully folded the dress and set it aside. The two women then made their way to the pond. While bathing, Bok-nam couldn't help but marvel at Haewon's flawless, porcelain-like skin. Her face showed a mixture of admiration and envy as she gently reached out to touch it. The tension quickly faded as the two began to play and splash water like carefree children, laughter echoing in the air. The next morning, a woman in heavy makeup and flashy clothes stepped off the boat and onto the island. Meanwhile, Haewon was outside on a quiet walk, curiously tasting some grass she had plucked from the ground. Suddenly, Seoljang appeared behind her, walking closer with an unsettling intent. Haewon, cautious and alert, quietly picked up a shard of glass from the ground and took a few steps back, her eyes fixed on him. Luckily, Yeonhee ran up at that moment, breaking the tension. Seoljang scowled and walked away, his plans foiled. Smiling, Yeonhee handed a freshly picked flower to Haewon, who gratefully accepted it. Haewon then spent time playing with Yeonhee, showing her a rare moment of kindness. Meanwhile, Bok-nam sat alone outside her house, eating her meal in large, hurried bites. From inside the house came muffled sounds of what was unmistakably an intimate encounter. The truth was grim. The woman from the boat was a prostitute Manjang had brought back, but Bok-nam's expression remained indifferent, as if such things no longer fazed her. After some time, a tired Haewon returned with Yeonhee to Bok-nam's house. When Haewon heard the noises coming from inside, disbelief and disgust filled her face. Bok-nam rushed forward, pulling Yeonhee away from the scene. Haewon couldn't hold back any longer. "What is going on here, Bok-nam?" she demanded, but Bok-nam pretended not to hear. Instead, she hurriedly urged Haewon, "Take my daughter and leave this place." Once the prostitute finished her business, she calmly sat beside Bok-nam and began touching up her makeup. Noticing Bok-nam's darkened skin, she pulled out a small bottle of sunscreen and handed it to her. The two began chatting. The woman asked, "Why don't you run away? If it were me, I'd be long gone. I tried before," she admitted. "If they catch me again, they might actually kill me." Bok-nam then turned the question on the prostitute. "Why do you do this kind of work?" The woman laughed loudly but didn't answer. Instead, she asked, "Why don't you come with me to Seoul? If you ever make up your mind, just give me a call." The scene shifts to Bok-nam collecting honey while Manjang sat lazily nearby, a blade of grass between his teeth as he barked orders at her. "Why aren't you back making dinner yet?" Bok-nam ignored him, pretending not to hear, infuriated at being disregarded. Manjang picked up a rock and hurled it at her. The stone struck a beehive instead, sending a swarm of bees into a frenzy. Back at home, Bok-nam sat by the door, tending to her bee stings with quiet resolve. Manjang, unbothered, ordered her to return and finish collecting the rest of the honey. "I'll go when these stings heal," Bok-nam replied softly, but her words only enraged him further. Without hesitation, Manjang picked up a nearby piece of wood and hurled it straight at her. Bok-nam ran to Haewon, seeking refuge. She watched curiously as Haewon practiced yoga and asked, "What are you doing?" Haewon sat up abruptly, her tone sharp. "What was that with Manjang and the prostitute? No one here cares. They all turn a blind eye. There's nothing I can do." Then, trying to lighten the moment, Bok-nam mimicked Haewon's yoga poses, clumsily stretching and giggling. The two women lay side by side under the sun, basking in its gentle rays. When Bok-nam returned home, her mood lifted. She hopped up with a smile and began collecting the laundry, but as she sorted through the clothes, her joy vanished. Tucked inside Manjang's pants were her daughter's shorts. Panicked, Bok-nam hurried into the house and found Yeonhee sitting alone in front of the mirror, smearing makeup on her young face. "What are you doing?" Bok-nam demanded, her voice trembling. "Where did you get this makeup?" "Dad gave it to me," Yeonhee replied innocently. Before Bok-nam could react, Manjang appeared in the doorway, a dark shadow falling over the room. With a brutal kick, he sent Bok-nam crashing to the floor. He grabbed the bottles of makeup and poured them over her, the liquid dripping as she scrambled to pick up the pieces, but her eyes froze when she saw Manjang's hand lingering on their daughter. Yeonhee, her trembling fingers reached for the nearby sickle, her knuckles white with rage, but then her eyes met Yeonhee's, who stared at her from Manjang's arms, confused and afraid. Bok-nam's grip loosened. Meanwhile, Haewon's phone buzzed with a message. She glanced at the screen. It was an official notice of her dismissal. Defeated, she began packing her belongings, preparing to return to Seoul. As she zipped up her bag, she noticed Bok-nam sitting quietly outside her door. Haewon stepped out and thanked Bok-nam for taking care of her over the past few days. "I'll be heading back to Seoul soon," she added. Hearing this, Bok-nam's voice trembled as she pleaded, "Can you take me and my daughter with you?" Haewon frowned and shook her head. "Seoul is far worse than this place. Let's talk about it next time." You said the same thing 15 years ago, she whispered. Desperation overtook her as she continued. Then at least take Yun-hee with you, please. Take my daughter away from here. Why? She asked, her voice sharp. Bok-nam refused to answer directly. If you take her, I swear I'll never bother you again. No more letters, no more calls. But Haewon stood firm. If you don't tell me the truth, I'm not taking her. Bok-nam revealed the truth. Manjang had been abusing her daughter, Yun-hee. Haewon didn't believe her. You'll say anything just to get to Seoul, won't you? Even something like this? The next morning, guilt weighed on Haewon. She approached Yun-hee, trying to uncover the truth for herself. Does your father love you? She asked softly. Yun-hee didn't answer, but her eyes said it all. Haewon wanted to press further, but her efforts were interrupted by an old woman who suddenly appeared and whisked Yun-hee away. You'd best mind your own business, the woman warned Haewon, her voice sharp and cold. Meanwhile, Manjang was napping at home. Bok-nam quietly stole the money and keys from his pocket and slipped into the back room, unlocking a cabinet to reveal a hidden telephone. She dialed the number of the prostitute from earlier and begged her for help. Come take me to Seoul, Bok-nam pleaded. Before dawn, Bok-nam opened her eyes, her mind set. Grabbing her daughter Yun-hee, she snuck out of the house into the darkness. Their hearts lifted with hope as they spotted a small boat approaching the shore. Believing freedom was within reach, they ran toward it until Bok-nam's face fell. The boatman was a man she recognized, someone who had once assaulted her. Just like the others, clinging to a sliver of hope, she offered him money, desperate to make him leave quickly. But before they could escape, Bok-nam froze, panicked. Bok-nam urged the boatman, please, start the boat. He fumbled with his lighter and counted the money, while Bok-nam and Yun-hee could only watch helplessly as their chance for freedom slipped away. Manjang grabbed Bok-nam by the hair, dragging her violently to the ground and beating her. The old women nearby cackled with glee, shouting cruelly, break her legs. Manjang, the prostitute, watching in horror, turned to Cheoljan, begging him to intervene, but instead of helping, Cheoljan cruelly turned his intentions toward her. Desperate to protect her daughter, she grabbed a rock, only to be shoved down again by one of the old women. The old woman said, you should be grateful the men tolerate you. You shouldn't have hit him with a stone. Bok-nam's voice trembled as she screamed, because even she doesn't know who her father is. Every man here has violated me. Hearing those words, Manjang flew into a rage, kicking and beating Bok-nam mercilessly. Yun-hee, unable to stand by, ran forward to stop him, but Manjang grabbed her and threw her hard against a rock. Bok-nam rushed to her daughter's side, trembling as she cradled her tiny body. Yun-hee was no longer breathing. Manjang coldly told her not to grieve. Hearing those words, Bok-nam couldn't hold back any longer. She screamed, demanding everyone to leave. The scene shifts to a boat approaching the shore. A policeman steps off. It turns out he's someone Manjang's family called to issue Yun-hee's death certificate. However, the officer, determined to uncover the truth, began questioning the group. Bok-nam sat quietly, clutching a photo of her daughter in her trembling hands. Look at her sitting there so calmly. One sneered, maybe she's the one who killed her own daughter. The officer ignored them and turned to Bok-nam, his tone serious. What happened here? Bok-nam, her voice filled with pain, said, it was Manjang. Manjang immediately jumped in to defend himself. Bok-nam was trying to run away with the girl, and I caught them. I just wanted to bring them back home. He coldly added, I even told her that if she wanted to leave, she could go, but our daughter had to stay behind. I even offered her money to go. The boatman chimed in, nodding. Bok-nam declared firmly, the money wasn't his, I stole it. One of the old women rose to her feet, pointing at Bok-nam angrily, and Manjang's such a kind man, he was just trying to cover up your sins. The others eagerly echoed her words, fueling the lies. Manjang continued, weaving his false story further. Yun-hee was holding onto my leg, crying that she didn't want to leave. Bok-nam tried to drag her away, and she accidentally hit her head on the rock. That's how she died. Bok-nam's face fell as the crowd turned against her. Desperate, she looked to Haewon, the only one who could speak the truth. Haewon shifted uncomfortably as the crowd's eyes landed on her. Bok-nam's pleading gaze was unwavering, silently begging for help. But Haewon looked away and murmured, I didn't see anything. I was asleep. Bok-nam's last flicker of hope shattered. The truth was buried, and the officer moved on, leaving the matter unresolved. That night, Cheoljan brought dinner to Haewon's room. He placed it down quietly and walked out. But moments later, the door creaked open again. Cheoljan slipped inside, approaching Haewon's bed. Seeing her unconscious and vulnerable, he grinned and began removing her underwear. At that moment, Bok-nam appeared in the doorway, clutching a weapon tightly in her hand. Reluctantly, Seol-jong stood up, smirking as he left the room. She turned back to Hae-won, who lay unconscious, and memories of their childhood came flooding back. In the past, a young Hae-won had been teaching Bok-nam how to play the flute. Their laughter was cut short when 4 boys surrounded them, the same men they knew now: Man-jong, Seol-jong, the boatman, and the policeman. Man-jong stepped forward, grinning as he used a stick to lift Hae-won's skirt. Terrified, Hae-won hid behind Bok-nam. Bok-nam stood protectively in front of her friend, ready to fight back, but instead of staying, Hae-won turned and ran, leaving Bok-nam alone. The boys struck her, and she collapsed to the ground, unconscious. Back in the present, Hae-won regained consciousness, feeling groggy and nauseous. Elsewhere, Bok-nam stood silently by her daughter's grave. An old woman approached Man-jong, telling him the boat had arrived. Turning to Bok-nam, she began scolding her. "Stop being lazy, get back to work." But Bok-nam sat still, her face blank, as though her soul had left her body. Man-jong hurled a few insults her way before gathering the other men and heading out to sea to sell honey. The scene shifts to Hae-won working in the fields, quietly gathering potatoes under the scorching sun. Nearby, a group of old women sat comfortably in the shade, chatting idly about daily life. One of the women even offered to prepare fish for them to eat. Meanwhile, Bok-nam worked tirelessly, her face drenched in sweat as she filled sack after sack with potatoes. She showed no sign of stopping, her movements mechanical and relentless. Suddenly, Bok-nam paused. Without a word, she approached the women, grabbed a jug of water, and began drinking deeply. Moments later, the quiet field turned into a scene of horror. The women lay on the ground, lifeless, as Bok-nam sat silently on a mound of potatoes, surrounded by their bodies. The woman who had gone to prepare fish returned, carrying freshly sliced pieces, only to freeze in terror. The skies darkened, and rain began to pour. She wandered the island, hunting down the last of the old women. The next morning, Hae-won woke up and reached for her phone, only to find there was no signal. Confused, she headed to the signal station to investigate. There, she discovered that the wires had been deliberately cut. As she stood in stunned silence, an old woman crept up behind her and clamped a hand over her mouth. The faint sounds of muffled struggle drifted through the air, reaching Bok-nam's ears as she quietly cut an old man's hair nearby. At that moment, the old woman's body began to tremble uncontrollably. Bok-nam's footsteps broke the silence. Hae-won stood up, but Bok-nam struck her with a single punch, knocking her unconscious. Seeing her chance, the old woman scrambled to her feet and fled. What followed was a desperate chase. Bok-nam, relentless and unforgiving, pursued the old woman across the island. Finally, with nowhere left to run, the old woman found herself standing at the edge of a cliff, trapped.
남자들을 데리고 올 텐께.
By this time, the men on the island had returned after selling their honey. Man-jong and the boatman decided to check on the beehives, worried that last night's rain might have damaged them. Meanwhile, Seol-jong wandered over to the pond to wash his face. As he splashed water on himself, he froze when he noticed something in the water's reflection: Bok-nam standing silently behind him. Still oblivious to the danger, Seol-jong smirked and casually reached out to touch Bok-nam's body, as if nothing was out of the ordinary. Horrified by what she saw, Hae-won turned and bolted, running as fast as she could. Back near the hives, Man-jong and the boatman began walking home, only to spot potatoes scattered across the ground. Suspicious, they stopped and turned to a nearby elderly man with a vacant expression. They arrived at the pond where Seol-jong had been earlier and began drinking from the water. Suddenly, the boatman froze, his eyes widening as he stared blankly upward. Man-jong, noticing his expression, followed his gaze and was struck by the sight above them: Seol-jong's severed head, dangling gruesomely from a tree branch. Before they could react, Bok-nam silently approached them from behind. Bok-nam was struck down to the ground. When she regained consciousness, she found herself tied up, her face battered and bruised. Man-jong stood over her, his boots smashing into her body as he kicked her violently. Then, grabbing a knife from a nearby wall, he approached her, his intentions clear. Hae-won stepped forward to intervene, only to be slapped hard across the face. Smirking, he sneered, "Here's the deal, Bok-nam. Either you kill her, or she becomes my new wife." Bok-nam, her voice faint but calculated, suddenly called out, "Husband." Bok-nam leaned forward and began licking the bloodied knife in his hand, her eyes fixed on him as she sucked on his fingers. For years, his inability to perform in front of Bok-nam had fueled his abuse, leading to the horrors he inflicted on their daughter. But now, her words and actions stirred something in him. The distraction was all Bok-nam needed. In one swift motion, she bit down hard on Manjong's fingers, sinking her teeth in deep. Manjong roared in pain, shoving her off and stumbling back. Furious, he grabbed a nearby axe and lunged at her, but Bok-nam was faster. With her hands still partially bound, she grabbed a knife with her teeth and drove it into Manjong's side. Manjong staggered, gasping in disbelief, before pushing her away once more. On the ground, Bok-nam broke free of her restraints, her hands trembling with rage. She seized her sickle, straddled Manjong's weakened body, and began swinging the blade over and over. Each strike was filled with decades of pain, humiliation, and unspeakable suffering. Nearby, Hae-won grabbed the boatman, who had just returned after tending to his injuries, and they sprinted toward the boat. They climbed aboard and tried desperately to start the engine, but the boat, old and worn, refused to start. Bok-nam appeared on the shore, sickle in hand, closing the distance fast. Panicking, Hae-won pushed the boatman aside. "Let me try!" After several agonizing attempts, the engine finally roared to life, only for them to realize that the mooring rope was still tied to the dock. Realizing there was no other choice, the boatman swallowed his fear and jumped off the boat to untie the rope. Just as he untied the rope, Bok-nam charged at him. A vicious struggle ensued, and the two tumbled into the water. The boatman tried to climb back onto the boat, but the spinning propeller caught him, shredding him to pieces. Hae-won could only watch in horror as she escaped alone, the boat carrying her away from the nightmare. The scene shifts to a dingy, chaotic room where a group of men played cards. One of the men hung up the phone and told someone to head to an island to pick someone up. Meanwhile, Bok-nam, now wearing Hae-won's white dress, boarded a ferry bound for Seoul. When she stepped off the boat, unused to wearing high heels, she stumbled and fell. Docked nearby was another boat, Hae-won's, surrounded by policemen conducting an inspection. In another grim room, the policeman who had issued Yunhee's death certificate loomed over Hae-won, who lay unconscious on a sofa. He glanced at the empty duty office, then moved closer, his intentions clear. Just as he was about to act, the radio crackled to life, breaking the silence. When Hae-won came to, she found herself handcuffed in an unfamiliar space. Scanning the room in panic, her eyes froze. Bok-nam was there, sitting silently in the corner. Terrified, Hae-won bolted, yanking her way free and fleeing down the stairs. Bok-nam, dragging a heavy sledgehammer, followed her slowly, each step deliberate. Hae-won reached the lobby and tried to wake a slumped-over policeman, only to realize he was already unconscious. Another of Bok-nam's victims. The two women clashed violently, their struggle echoing through the empty station. Hae-won, knocked to the ground, scrambled toward the holding cells, slipping inside and locking the door behind her. Bok-nam stood on the other side, staring at the bars, unable to break through. Frustrated, she ran back to search the unconscious officer for keys. Instead, she found something else: a flute, the same flute Hae-won had given her when they were children. Holding it up, Bok-nam demanded, "Play it for me." Just as she started to push the door open, a gunshot rang out from behind her. With her final breath, she swung the sledgehammer toward Hae-won, but before she could, Hae-won grabbed the flute and drove it into Bok-nam's throat. It was the first time she had ever taken a life. Bok-nam, mortally wounded, dragged her broken body toward Hae-won, but she didn't attack. Instead, she looked at Hae-won with pleading eyes and whispered with her dying breath, "Play it for me." Just once more, as Bok-nam's body stilled and the room fell silent, the story came to its tragic, haunting end.